Hello and welcome to Camp, the Catholic Audiobook in a Month podcast. My name is William Wilson, and today is day 2 of The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. I will be reading the Introduction to Spiritual Maxims and Maxim Number One. The introduction has 4 points. 1. We must regard God in all we do. 2. We must understand that God will send numberless afflictions and adversities. 3. This is for our own good. 4. The soul must depend on grace each moment. Maxim number 1 is on the necessary practices for attaining to the spiritual life. And there's 6 of those. Number 1, practice the presence of God, holding loving converse with Him every moment. 2, this should be done without a method. 3, do all things thoughtfully. 4, in prayer, and really any time, turn to God in the depths of your being and turn from created things to God. And that reminds me of St. Teresa's prayer of recollection, this turning to God in the depths of your being. 5, acts of worship should be guided by faith. And 6, it's necessary to examine oneself, and I would say that St. Ignatius would agree. So that's for today's reading. Let's get started. The Spiritual Maxims of Brother Lawrence. All things are possible to him who believes. They are less difficult to him who hopes. They are easier to him who loves, and still more easy to him who practices and perseveres in these virtues. Brother Lawrence. Spiritual Maxims of Brother Lawrence. 1. We must study ever to regard God and His glory in all that we do and say and undertake. This is the end that we should set before ourselves, to offer to God a sacrifice of perfect worship in this life, as we hope to do through all eternity. We ought firmly to resolve to overcome, with the grace of God assisting us, the many difficulties which will meet us in the spiritual life. 2. When we enter upon the spiritual life, we ought to consider thoroughly what we are, probing to the very depth. We shall find that we are altogether deserving of contempt, unworthy of the name of Christ, prone to all manner of maladies, and subject to countless infirmities, which distress us and impair the soul's health, rendering us wavering and unstable in our humors and dispositions. In fact, creatures whom it is God's will to chasten and make humble by numerous afflictions and adversities, as well within as without. 3. We must believe steadfastly, never once doubting, that such discipline is for our good, that it is God's will to visit us with chastening, that it is the course of His divine providence to permit our souls to pass through all manner of sore experiences and times of trial, and for the love of God to undergo diverse sorrows and afflictions for so long as shall seem needful to Him. Since, without this submission of heart and spirit to the will of God, devotion and perfection cannot subsist. 4. A soul is the more dependent on grace, the higher the perfection to which it aspires. And the grace of God is the more needful for each moment, as without it the soul can do nothing. The world, the flesh, and the devil join forces and assault the soul so straitly and so untiringly that, without humble reliance on the ever-present aid of God, they drag the soul down in spite of all resistance. Thus to rely seems hard to nature, but grace makes it become easy and brings with it joy. Maxim 1. Of necessary practices for attaining to the spiritual life. 1. That practice which is alike the most holy, the most general, and the most needful in the spiritual life is the practice of the presence of God. It is the schooling of the soul to find its joy in His divine companionship, holding with Him at all times and at every moment humble and loving converse, without set rule or stated method, in all time of our temptation and tribulation, in all time of our dryness of soul and relish of God, yes, and even when we fall into unfaithfulness and actual sin. 2. We should apply ourselves unceasingly to this one end, to so rule all our actions that they be little acts of communion with God. But they must not be studied, they must come naturally from the purity and simplicity of the heart. 3. We must do all things thoughtfully and soberly, not impulsively or hurriedly, which denotes a mind undisciplined. We must go about our labors quietly, calmly, and lovingly, entreating Him to prosper the works of our hands. By thus keeping heart and mind fixed on God, we shall bruise the head of the evil one and beat down his weapons to the ground. 4. When we are busied or meditating on spiritual things, even in our time of set devotion, whilst our voice is rising in prayer, we ought to cease for one brief moment, as often as we can, to worship God in the depth of our being, to taste Him, though it be in passing, to touch Him, as it were, by stealth. Since you cannot but know that God is with you in all you undertake, that He is at the very depth and center of your soul, why should you not thus pause an instant from time to time in your outward business, and even in the act of prayer, to worship Him within your soul, to praise Him, to entreat His aid, to offer Him the service of your heart, and give Him thanks for all His loving kindness and tender mercies? What offering is there more acceptable to God than thus throughout the day to quit the things of outward sense, and to withdraw to worship Him within the secret places of the soul? Besides, by so doing we destroy the love of self, which can subsist only among the things of sense, and of which these things of quiet retirement with God rid us well nigh unconsciously. In very truth, we can render to God no greater or more signal proofs of our trust and faithfulness than by thus turning from things created to find our joy through a single moment in the Creator. Yet think not that I counsel you to disregard completely and forever the outward things that are around us. That is impossible. Prudence, the mother of the virtues, must be your guide. Yet, I am confident, it is a common error among religious persons to neglect this practice of ceasing for a time that which they are engaged upon, to worship God in the depth of their soul, and to enjoy the peace of brief communion with Him. This digression has been long, and yet it seemed to me the matter demanded such. Let us return to our subject. 5. These, our acts of worship, are to be prompted and guided by faith. We must unfeignedly believe that God is in very fact within our souls, and that we must worship Him and love Him and serve Him in spirit and in truth, that He sees all, and that unto Him all hearts are open, our own and those of all His creatures, that He is self-existent, whilst it is in Him that all creatures live and move and have their being, that His perfection is infinite and sovereign, and demands the full surrender of ourselves, our souls, and bodies. In simple justice, we owe Him all our thoughts and words and actions. Let us see to it that we pay our debt. 6. Necessity is laid upon us to examine ourselves with diligence, to find out what are the virtues which we chiefly lack, and which are the hardest for us to acquire. We should seek to learn the sins that do most easily beset us, and the times and occasions when we do most often fall. In the time of struggle, we ought to have recourse to God with perfect confidence, abiding steadfast in the presence of His divine majesty. In lowly adoration, we should tell out before Him our griefs and our failures, asking Him lovingly for the succor of His grace, and in our weakness we shall find in Him our strength. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the reading. Tomorrow I will read Spiritual Maxims 2 through 4 on how it is required of us to worship God in spirit and in truth, of union of the soul with God, and of the presence of God. If you have enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe, rate, share, and help us grow. Also, please check out aratebooks.com, now featuring The Ways of Mental Prayer by Vital Laodé, praised by Pope St. Pius X and spiritual leaders across generations. This masterwork guides readers through the transformative journey of prayer, from its foundational practices to its most profound mystical heights. That's oratebooks.com. If you'd like to learn more about us, please visit camp.fm. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you tomorrow.